Osric holds barrels for a brewer and shares a yard with a handful of families. Every morning he fills his cup at the yard's well. A few steps from the pit they all share, and what leaks from one is in the other. That water buries his children young, and there's nothing rare about it. His city doesn't shrink though, because people from the countryside keep walking in. And with a historian's confidence, I can tell you the big pre-modern cities ran on it. Name where your city's waste goes, then who keeps arriving, and you'll know if your city can hold its number. 2 questions decide that, and I'm calling the pair of them the Cesspit test, because the pit is where both of them start. If you've ever looked up how many people a medieval city should hold, you've probably met a free document called Medieval Demographics Made Easy. It's genuinely useful, and it has been passed around world-building circles for many years. The problem is that it only hands you a figure and a list of shops, but nothing at all about where things go. So let's put something underneath the number. One adult body, on a pre-modern diet that runs heavy on grain and light on meat, puts out 1/4 of a kilo of solid waste a day, plus nearly 1.5 liters of liquid on top of that. Now stand 100,000 people behind it, which is a modest capital by fantasy standards. That's 25 tons a day of solid waste alone, and I do mean a day rather than a year, with the liquid soaking away wherever it lands. By Sunday it's 175 tons. By the end of the year it's over 9,000 tons of material that has to be somewhere in a city with no pipes and no trucks. And that counts the people only, because the horses and oxen hauling everything through the city add their own share to the same heap, where a single cart horse puts out what dozens of men do. That pile doesn't move on its own. Whatever leaves that pile leaves in a barrel or on a cart, with a man who expects to be paid for the trip. Magic the cart away and you've still got somebody to pay, because the spell has an owner and a price, and that owner ends up in your world exactly the way the cartman does. Now, whichever way your city moves it, the picture that just arrived in your head is probably a street running with filth and everybody wading through it cheerfully. That picture is Victorian, and it's mostly wrong for the medieval city. Dolly Jurgensen, who studies medieval sanitation for a living, says the popular image is built on modern ideas of civility and scientific progress, and that the early 14th century street was not nearly as filthy as we picture it. Those cities governed the mess. In 1312, London's Assize of Nuisance, a court that existed for exactly this kind of complaint, ordered Henry Le Brewer to move his cesspit 3.5 feet back off his neighbor's wall and gave him a deadline to do it in, with a fine waiting on the end in case he fancied arguing. That ruling was about distance, and that's exactly what matters here. Because wherever a city puts the heap, that spot is usually within walking distance of the water the city drinks. A city without engines simply cannot afford to cart anything heavy far. Picture 9 o'clock at night in London, because 9 is the hour the work starts. The men who emptied cesspits were called gong farmers, and they were only permitted to work between 9 in the evening and 5 in the morning. In the late 1400s, they charged 2 shillings a ton for it. That's the trade. It's legal and licensed, and it costs more than a lot of households have. A city has a short list of places the stuff can end up, and every one of them ends with somebody being paid. The cheapest is to do nothing, which means a pit under the house that sits there until the household can afford to have it lifted out. Then there's the river, which is what the street crews existed for. London paid men called rakers and scavengers to haul rubbish out past the city limits or straight down to the Thames, the river along the city's southern edge. The best answer, if you can reach it, is the countryside, because the stuff is fertilizer and a farmer within a cart ride will take it off your hands. Public latrines existed too, but there were nowhere near enough of them to matter in a city of tens of thousands. Now run that list on Osric. His yard has 4 households in it, and the pit gets emptied when all 4 of them can afford it in the same month, which is not a thing 4 households manage often. That fee gets put off another season and the pit stays where it is, which makes the destination for everything those 4 households produce the ground of the yard he draws his water in. And that's a decision rather than an accident. 2 shillings a ton is money that was going to buy something else, and every season it gets weighed against a roof that lets the rain in, and every season it loses. Nobody in that yard is stupid or dirty, and every one of them is just slightly poorer than the fee. That's question 1 answered for one man, and it's the answer most cities give, because the real destination for waste in a poor quarter is the poor quarter. You'd never catch that one on your own, because nothing in the scene breaks when it's wrong. A reader gets to the end of the chapter perfectly happy. The world underneath it is still hollow, and the only reason you can see this one is that somebody stood in front of it and pointed. If you'd like the rest of them pointed at, My Fantasy Writing Remedies is a free library of 40 named writing problems with a fix written for each one, sorted across 7 categories, no sign up in front of it, and the link is in the description. With that said, medieval Europe was not the only place that ever had to solve the cesspit problem. Rome had answered the where it goes question in stone with a vaulted main drain carrying the forum's waste down to the Tiber, wide enough in places to drive a loaded hay wagon through, and Rome got nothing back for it but a drained forum. It didn't go that way everywhere though, because there is one city that answered question 1 in a way nobody else managed, and it did it by making the waste worth money. Edo, which is Tokyo before it was Tokyo, held roughly 1 million people by the early 1700s, and farmers came in from outside and paid households for what was in their pits. It ran on yearly contracts, and a landlord with a shared privy could make real money out of one. Same material, same problem, and a destination that earned money on its way out of the gate. The thing to put outside the gate on your own map is a buyer, and a road he can bring a cart down. Put that man there, and the pit in a yard like Osric stops being a bill 4 households can never quite meet. Without that buyer, the pit stays, and one case shows what a pit next to a well does. It comes from Victorian London rather than a medieval one, and the mechanism is the same either way. During the Broad Street cholera outbreak, a public well had been dug 3 feet from an old cesspit that had begun to leak. Then 616 people died. The arrangement it grew out of was completely ordinary, because at the time there were cesspits under most homes. So question 1 has an answer in every city that ever had to give one. On your map, that answer is a number, which is how many steps a man walks from his pit to the water he drinks. Get that number wrong and the city starts losing people, slowly every year it stands. The killer is the boring one, the ordinary gut sickness that comes off bad water, the kind of thing nobody writes a chapter about, and it comes around most years instead of once a generation. It takes the children first because a small body loses water faster than anybody can put it back. In 18th century London, this finally starts getting counted. For the middle of the century, the estimates put the city somewhere between 300 and 400 babies, buried out of every 1,000 born. It took until the 1840s for London to come down to the national average of about 160. So the city spent the better part of a century burying its infants at roughly twice the rate it would eventually reach, and nobody living in it could name why. Smallpox and the fevers took their share of that too, but bad water is the one your city's layout decides. When Osric buries a child, somebody walks in that same week and takes the empty place. She's 14, and she came in from a village 2 days out to go into service in somebody else's house. The city's ledger, if anybody were keeping one, comes out. Level. The scale of that is genuinely hard to hold in your head. Around the year 1700, 1/6 of everyone born in England spent part of their life in London. That's 1 person in 6. For an enormous number of English people, London was somewhere you went for a few years and came back from, or didn't, and the city held its size by taking in the countryside's young people year after year forever. Your own map needs the same thing, and it takes 1 question to put it there. Ask who arrives in your city, by trade and by name. It's the younger son with no land coming in to learn something, and it's the girl sent into service in a house she'll never own any part of. Multiply those 2 by every village within a week's walk and you have your migration. And the answer to question 2. They also arrive with nothing, which is why the poorest quarter of a city is usually the newest one, and why the yard Osric lives in never gets any better however rich the city gets around it. A city that size never stops needing them, because it needs a flow of people the way it needs a flow of grain. If the countryside on your map is empty, or a war just took that year's young men off the roads, the city can't hold its size, and everybody living in it can feel the difference inside a decade. There's a break condition on all of this though, because it isn't a law, and I'd be lying if I sold you one. Some towns really did outbreed their own dead, and the case with the paperwork is York, up in the north of England, a city of about 10,000 people in 1600. 5 of its parish registers survive in print across Elizabeth's reign. The church books where baptisms and burials got written down, and in every one of those 5, the baptisms come out ahead of the burials. Then the 17th century arrives and the same city turns over into a long run of burials ahead of baptisms. The picture of a city that always buries more than it baptizes overstates what really happened. So your world is allowed its exception. It just has to say what makes it one and how long it lasts, because York's lasted about a reign. So what does your world do about it? It probably has an answer already, which is completely fine. This is fantasy. If you've got a cleansing rite that purifies a well, or an order whose entire business is making a city's water safe, that's a good thing to have invented, and I'm not taking it off you. The Cesspit test still applies to your city, however, except now it runs on the fix instead of the city. The moment a world reaches for a fix, whether that's a stone sewer or a working miracle, you've invented something that somebody has to build, and then keep paying for. Put the same two questions to the fix, and then ask the one that decides everything downstream, which is who owns it, because somebody paid for that right. Somebody is licensed to perform it and somebody else isn't, and the second one has strong opinions about the arrangement. A temple that purifies water has an income and a waiting list. A guild that does it has a monopoly, meaning nobody else is allowed near the work, and a very good reason to make sure nobody learns the trick for free. Keep the upkeep in view too, because that yearly bill has names on it. Somebody trains the people who work it and buys whatever it consumes, and the year the treasury runs short is the year the districts at the bottom of the list find out exactly how short. There's a city in print with a whole university of wizards in it that settled this question in favor of a man with cards. Ankh-Morpork is the city Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels keep coming back to, and the river running through it is still the filthiest water on that world. The waste trade there belongs to Harry King, who charges people a fee to carry their full buckets away, then sells what was in them onto the farmers. And the rival crews who tried the same business got bought out or run off. Notice which way the money runs, because it's turned around from Edo. There the farmers paid the household, and here the household pays Harry, and Harry keeps the sale on top. So the difference between those two cities is who owns the trade, and having wizards in town doesn't decide that for you. Then there's the geography of it, which is the part I find most useful of all. Every service in a pre-modern city reaches the rich streets first and the poor streets last, because the rich streets are where the money that pays for it lives. So your purified water reaches the temple district in the first year, while Osric's yard has to wait for who knows how long. And everyone in that yard knows precisely where they sit in that queue. That queue is where your grassroots come from, meaning the bottom layer of a political world, the everyday people who push back at the powers standing over them. They have one specific thing to push back about, and it's the well in their own yard. So a city that fixes this in a named way has invented a class of people who own the fix. That class is the most powerful group in your city now, whether you meant to write them or not, which is roughly the point where one question stops being about one city. Once you're deciding who owns the water, you're deciding the religion and the class structure at the same time. And that is what my complete system for building your fantasy world is built to do. That's 10 modules and over 60 lessons that take a world from the top down and hand it back as a story-ready world bible. It's open now, one payment, yours for good, and the link is below. Back in the city itself, the class that owns the fix is exactly why a city that fails this test is worth more to you than a city that passes it. That's because a city that passes has nothing left to argue about, while a city that fails has one group getting rich off the failure and another living in it. And that argument is where your story already is. Look at what you're holding now, standing on the same dot you started on. For the world builder, the streets change first. Your city has a trade in it that works nights and pays better than anybody admits. And the people in that trade live at the edge of town because everybody wants them near enough to call and far enough to forget. Granting your city some magical right only moves that trade, because the crews end up working the streets the right hasn't reached yet. The tanners and the night crews sit downwind and downstream of everyone else, because a city where somebody has thought about this puts its worst smells, where the wind takes them away from the people with money. Your city's records would likely have a fight in them about who holds the rights to which streets, because those routes are worth real coin. And your calendar has a season in it now, high summer, when the river runs low and the pits soak through into the wells, and everybody who can afford to leave goes out to their country houses. In London, the emptying was practically official, because Parliament rose for the summer and the governing class left for their country estates together, and a capital is where that class lives. That season is the most useful thing on the whole list, because it empties the capital of exactly the people your plot needs somewhere else. Take the same city to a tabletop game and it's a whole session with nobody evil in it. The temple's right reaches 4 districts, the 5th has been on that waiting list for 3 generations, and this year the temple can afford to add one more. So the players end up in a room where the priest who performs the rite sits across from whoever speaks for the 5th district, and the temple's treasurer sits between them, holding the year's accounts. Everybody in that room has a reasonable position, and somebody still has to decide. The novelist gets the smallest version of it and the best one. It's the moment where a character doesn't get to choose. Her son is sick, the water that won't kill him is 3 districts away behind a gate, and the man who can open the gate wants something for it. She has to decide what she will trade for 1 bucket of water, at a price set by whoever decided which district the clean water reaches first. Ultimately, you came into this video with a number written under a city. Now you're leaving with a city that has somewhere for everything to go, and somebody in it who resents how the water gets shared. But that resentment only matters if the city is still standing in 100 years. which is a completely separate question from the one you just answered. Because a city can solve its waste and still be sitting on a spot it should never have occupied. I made a whole video about that, about what put a dot there and what keeps it there now, and then the question almost nobody asks about their own map. It's on screen right now, so go watch that one next.